Mi gente, hello, and welcome to Kica's Corner. My name is Kica Matos, and I am your host. On this show, we talk about our community, our city, and our world, but we always do it through a New Haven lens that is rooted in social justice. Today, we're going to talk about freedom of the press, journalism, and New Haven. And we're going to do so by interviewing one of New Haven's legends. She is a legend and she is a legendary reporter, and that is Mary O'Leary. Mary knows more about this city than anyone else I know. And unfortunately for us New Haven residents and for people around the state, Mary recently announced that she will be retiring from the New Haven Register after working there for 50 years, which means, of course, Mary, that you started working at the Register when you were about 5 years old.
Exactly.
Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Good to
Uh,
see you, always.
Good to see you too. I wish we were in the studio, but maybe we could do it. We could have another chat when this pandemic is over.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love it. So carry on. I know this is a great show. I love tuning into it.
Thank you. Let me do a little bit of framing.
Sure.
One of our founding fathers and our third US president, Thomas Jefferson, said this about the importance of the press in a democracy, and I'm going to quote, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." Our 35th US president, John F. Kennedy, said this about the press. Quote, "Even though we never like it, and even though we wish they didn't write it, and even though we disapprove, there isn't any doubt that we could not do the job at all in a free society without a very, very active press." Our 45th president, Donald Trump, said this about the role of the press. Quote, "It's quite frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want." He went on to say this about journalists. "I would never kill them, but I do hate them. Some of them are such lying, disgusting people." Such is the importance of the press in our democracy that they are protected by our Constitution. The First Amendment states in part that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. The press is sometimes also referred to as the fourth estate because they are seen as an additional branch of government whose job is to serve as an additional check on our government. Here in New Haven, we rely mostly on two outlets to bring the news to us, the New Haven Register and the New Haven Independent. They keep us abreast of what's happening in our city. They tell us what our government is up to. They share with us how our communities are faring. And they talk about how our states and towns are doing. So it brings me much joy to have Mary in the studio, in the virtual studio with me today. Let me say a little bit about Mary. She's what I called an OG. She's an original gangster from New Haven. She joined the staff of the Journal Courier and then the New Haven Register in 1970. Her beats have included Guilford, Madison, North Branford, the state capitol, and she's also covered political campaigns, including gubernatorial and US Senate races. Writing about Mary, Paul Bass said this of her: "She is considered among the state's most dogged political and government reporters." So Mary, I'm going to turn the spotlight on you now and ask you why it is that you decided to become a journalist.
Well, I think I lucked out. Just getting out of college, I had a friend who worked at the Journal Courier, and she suggested go down there and apply, and I did. I mean, this is pretty much ancient history, but I absolutely loved it. I mean, just even from the beginning, my husband would complain I'd be talking about sewer commission meetings, in the very beginning, and he'd be like, not listening at that point. But since then, I mean, just to be an observer of what's going on and how fascinating it is that people, how they govern themselves, how so many good people volunteer to participate in government, and just the advocates for really social justice right from the beginning. I think in New Haven, over all the long time I've been there, has been outstanding. It's and I'm not sure of other communities so much as I am of New Haven, but I think it really is unique in that aspect. And in that sense, I've been lucky to do it all these years and to watch it grow.
Why did you just stay local all the time?
I did, and there was a while where the paper didn't have an assigned person to cover state government, and I just kind of volunteered, would go up there and cover things. And it was always, issues that would reflect back to the city. I mean, it was immigration, land use kind of issues, healthcare especially. I mean, I did a lot of coverage of healthcare. And, maybe 10 years ago when there was a real movement for reform and they got some things done on insurance and, making that easier for people. So, but it was still not, the local, I think the local is really, where a lot of the action is. And it was much more satisfying. So I sort of went back between them, back and forth. And now we have a different arrangement. I mean, there's the Hearst Company owns 6 papers, the whole length of Southern Connecticut. And so they have more specialized, people that are there all the time. So that's how our coverage has gone on the state level.
There have been a number of TV shows that have elevated the climate in the press rooms, and I think about shows like Mary Tyler Moore and other TV sitcoms way back in the day, and many of them elevated just the challenges that women faced in these really tough male-dominated environments. I'm wondering for you what it was like to be a woman journalist in the 1970s, and whether it's easier now than it was then, assuming it was as challenging as the portrayals that we've seen of it.
Right. I don't know. I think I might have gotten into it at the right time. I think it was always, there was never an assumption that you couldn't do something because you were female, or that you didn't qualify, or you couldn't qualify for a more interesting beat. So in that sense, I think maybe I've been lucky to, you would see maybe less coverage by female reporters at the state at a certain point, but that's no longer an issue. I mean, ancient history, women were restricted. I think at the Journal Courier, I think people were just on the, society desk essentially, and that was the career for them. But that's long gone.
Wow. And restricted in what ways? What were you able to cover and not cover? I didn't know that.
Well, I don't think that really, by the time I was doing it, there really wasn't, I think people, there were always, other female reporters before I got there, and then after, and now, obviously now there's, I think in a lot of sense, I think the majority on some of these desks, females, and in the production part, in the editing part, and all the technical parts now that, newspapers have to be up on. That's, not an issue at all. Thank goodness.
I did a little bit of research yesterday and timed your trajectory in journalism, and looked at the number of mayors that have been that were presiding over city affairs. And by my count, you have covered New Haven under the leadership of 7 different mayors. You have seen the city go through a process of urban renewal, go through, peaks and drops, suffer through the crack epidemic, periods of economic decline and prosperity. And you have been a close observer of the demographic changes that have taken place in the city. I'm wondering if for you there's such a thing as a favorite decade city-wise.
I think it's, for most part, it was always evolving, just to a better state. Very different personalities of people running the city. I think that had an impact. I think under Toni Harper, I think she really made a point of empowering more minorities, making sure people were in positions of power and in government. The youth stat outreach, to really sort of take, some kids who were just kind of lost, always seemed lost in the system. And that was, I think that was really a big feature of her administration when she was here. And John, I mean, I really think I know John, who was there for 20 years, another long timer from New Haven. As the other mayors, I mean, I was sort of coming in, but in and out doing other things, and it wasn't like the huge. I do remember, Frank Loeb and the fights within the Democratic Party for more progressive policies and leaders. When Rosa DeLauro came in, that was Marty Looney. I mean, all those people started back then, and then they've had great careers and gone to other levels. So that was actually fun to watch. But the day-to-day things, I think I probably know John DeStefano more, Tony, and now Justin, who is just starting out, but very progressive and picking up and pushing issues that might have been ignored for a while.
I won't be impressed. I'm going to ask you if you have a favorite mayor. You're listening to Kica's Corner on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio, broadcast at 103.5 FM and live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. As you mentioned earlier, you've been assigned to a broad range of beats, some of which really focused on the city and some focused on different towns as well as the state. Can you pinpoint one that has been most rewarding for you, and conversely, one that has been most challenging?
I think the most rewarding thing is actually covering immigration in the city. And I mean, I actually was there when the first raid by the federal government came into the city, basically as a punishment. When you were in charge, when you were running an agency that came up with the ID card and was looking to really, take care of people who were long ignored. That definitely was, I think, the most interesting, and it continues to be too, in the setbacks under the Trump administration. Kind of heartbreaking the way people have, there were a lot of successes, particularly through the Yale Law School clinics. I mean, they got changes at the federal level in the way people, they could treat, couldn't just just ignore these people's rights. So that was really exciting. And now it's, to try to get back to some kind of state or actually advance, some protections for people. I think the country is just starting that again at this point with a new president.
Have you ever gotten so close to a story that it's really impacted you emotionally? Like, I've never seen you cry. I've never seen you get overly emotional. You are always the ultimate professional journalist, and you always ask fair questions, and you're always very respectful. And your journalism, the way that you write, is in such a way that you really focus on different perspectives. But I wonder if for you there were stories where you went home and Marty had to help you pick up the pieces, or a story just didn't leave you for emotional reasons.
Right. Well, again, some of the immigration stories when people didn't turn out well for them and they did get deported. Those are pretty tough. And you're exactly right. I mean, that's where I would talk about it. I'd come home and talk to my husband. And the other story was kids poisoned by lead. Just the difference between the level of inquiry at the state, where they actually look at kids and decide that they have to be treated or take action, clean up the house in New Haven, as opposed to the state. I mean, the state rules are, in a sense, really absurd. I mean, like there was a great story in the paper, I guess, recently. We just got it from the, I think it was the Mirror and the I-Team, which focuses on healthcare issues. It just showed the extent of the suffering of these kids, inner city kids. It is a huge problem, but I think as a society, people have to decide that this is really awful. These kids are so hurt.
I want to pivot and talk a little bit about the changing landscape of newspapers. The internet really, I think, did a a great disservice to journalism in many ways. And we saw the demise of newspapers across the country, a radical reduction in the ability of newspapers to support journalists who focus on investigative journalism. I wonder what your thoughts are about that progression and what you think is going to be the future of journalism.
It's really scary. I mean, I think particularly the Sinclair Group taking over local papers, local television stations. So there's, in my opinion, there's real distortion of news, and it's pervasive. I mean, it's pretty wide network across the country. I think in Connecticut, where I was in this little bubble, that we can still see progress or some news outlet. There's news outlets that obviously I think people can depend on. But across the country, I mean, it's really scary. I mean, it's scary for democracy that people are, totally so misinformed. And there are good, digital sites, and obviously the Independent is one of them. So in that sense, New Haven to have two, stable outlets to reach out to stay informed. We're lucky here.
I want to focus, drill down a little bit more and talk about journalism over the last 4 years. And, in addition to the negative impact that the internet has had on journalism, we've had a president who has really tried to control freedom of the press and driven this narrative that there's such a thing as fake news and that it's okay to just make things up out of whole cloth. I just want to share with you, I don't know if you've come across this report that was published in April of this year by the Committee on to Protect Journalists. And it said that basically one of the findings was that President Trump and his administration's attack on the press, quote unquote, dangerously undermined truth and consensus in a deeply divided country. So my question for you is twofold: whether you agree with this assessment, and whether or not the last 4 years, as a result of all of this, it's been harder for you as a journalist to tell stories.
Well, I definitely agree with the statement, and it completely astounds me all the time when I run up against a wall, that the truth is just doesn't resonate with people. I mean, it's so. And again, it goes back to democracy and actually having a government or people that can self-govern if they don't have information, if they don't have the truth, if they don't know really what is going on. I think he's done tremendous damage, and it was just, people have predicted this, I guess, in other countries, or this is something that has been studied by others in other countries. How this happens, I never thought it would happen here. So it's something that's, has to be, people have to be vigilant. I mean, maybe they are more so now. I think, it's a pretty close election, and we still have a lot of people that don't disagree with the president, with President Trump. But I think there's enough people now, and maybe civic education will be better in the schools. I mean, maybe people just won't take this for granted anymore, that you really have to work at it. And participate in your government.
You mentioned earlier, we know you as a reporter who really knows her stuff when it comes to issues of immigration, and you understand the nuances, you understand the policies, you always make it a point to talk to immigrant communities. Over the last 4 years, given the deeply anti-immigrant administration at the federal level, how was it for you covering issues of immigration?
Again, I mean, the stories got sadder, or it was harder for people, I think, to make progress because of the federal government. I mean, there wasn't much flexibility. I mean, people would be angry at President Obama because of the millions of people that were deported. But there was enough flexibility in the system that people could advance. I mean, things that should have been taken care of, or cases, were resolved in favor of people. I mean, a more just. Now it's, I mean, there's so much I think that has to be undone. I'm not sure, how fast the new administration can do it, or if it's been poisoned so much that immigration reform that actually was something that could be done across the aisle nationally, if we can get back to that level again. It's so personally, I mean, they continue to be the same kind of stories for me. It would always focus on individuals and what was happening to their lives. The system of prisons where people are held, I mean, that's something I think that might be one of the first things that might be undone. That's totally changed, I think, the atmosphere for people that are sort of caught up in that.
How many stories have you written? Do you have any idea?
I don't, I'm really bad at kind of calculating that and kind of looking back and just, I don't know. I just, you sort of get up every day and you see what you have to do that day. Maybe that's why I stuck around so long, I guess. Have
you ever suffered from writer's block?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, some things are, in a sense, it's easier when you're doing sort of day-to-day journalism. I mean, there's always a deadline and you have to do it. So you end up doing what the best thing you can. But it can. I mean, longer term stories, bigger stories. Sometimes it's hard to sort of get your head around it quickly. How about you?
Oh my God, all the time. All the time. I find writing to be a really difficult thing to do. It's for me a technical challenge, and I'm very good at trying to meet deadlines, but sometimes I have to walk away from it and get up the next morning and take a fresh eye. I couldn't be a journalist because there would just be too many writing deadlines for me to meet. Do you have a favorite story? Like, is there one article that you wrote and that you feel particularly good about?
I'm just trying to think of. Yeah, there's one. I mean, there was a political one. I don't know if I really want to go into it, but it was fun. It was fun to kind of unravel the mess that was out there. That one. I mean, it took a long time to do that one, but I don't know. I can't sort of focus on one at the moment.
All right, I'll let that one go. But offline, I'm going to ask you what that's.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I'll tell you then.
Okay, you promise?
I do.
All right. So Mary, as part of my preparation for this interview, I reached out to a wide range of New Haven residents, and here's what they had to say about you. Starting with, and in the spirit of transparency, I'll say my husband, who's also Henry Fernandez. He's also the executive director of LEAP, and he was former the Economic Development Administrator for the city of New Haven. And this is what he said about you. Quote, Mary O'Leary has done an amazing job explaining the nuanced politics of New Haven to her readers. Politicians honest and uncovered when they were not, lifted up community to protect immigrants from the force of the federal government, and told us stories of those often forgotten by those with power and privilege. She reminded us daily why journalism matters and why journalists are essential in our democracy. Nicole Jefferson, a longtime New Haven resident and the former executive director of the Commission on Equal Opportunities, noted that, quote, Mary is detailed and more than fair in her reporting. Megan Fountain of Unidad Latina en Acción had this to say, oh my goodness, Mary O'Leary is the best! Exclamation, 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 exclamation. I think that the first time that I came to appreciate her was when she covered the story of Jose Maria Islas, who was mistakenly arrested for an attempted bicycle theft. When the judge essentially acquitted Mr. Islas, the court marshals held him and turned him over to ICE for deportation, which sparked a year-long campaign to free him, stop his deportation, and enact the Connecticut Trust Act. I also recall a powerful story that Mary wrote about the moms and teens who were fleeing Guatemala and arriving in New Haven. What I love about Mary is that she does careful research about complex immigration laws, and when she helps the public, and then she helps the public understand the way that these laws play out in the lives of real people. She has spent years, actually decades, following the same people, the same communities, and the same legal issues, which gives her reporting an unparalleled complexity and richness. John Lugo of Unidad Latina en Acción noted that for people who have little chance of being heard, Mary gives them an opportunity to tell their stories. When she interviews them, she shows them deep respect. From the immigration raids in 2007 to the Century Movement in the Trump years, Mary has been there. We love you, Mary O'Leary. Just note, Mary, this is from John Lugo, who's usually not very emotional. And finally, I want to share, this is a little bit longer, from Charlotte Nietzsche of Shoreline Indivisible. She said that Mary O'Leary is an integral part of what's right about New Haven. I first met Mary when we were trying to lift the story of Nuri Chavarria, a single mother of 4 dependent children who had been in the US for 24 years and was suddenly facing imminent deportation because of a cruel and twisted executive order that 45 put into play, making all law-abiding immigrant parents subject to deportation. After interviewing the family and telling this story in a way that made front-page news, Mary followed up with me many times. One time, she called to see what we were doing to protect Nuri, and when she heard my response, she said something like, quote, "That's it. That is not the way we do it in New Haven. I have since learned more about how, quote unquote, we do it in New Haven." Mary's story on Nuri caught the attention of La Hora, the largest newspaper in Guatemala, further uplifting Nuri's stories. Years later, when a Wilbur Cross student was picked up by ICE as he approached the courthouse to answer to a minor charge, Mary was right there to cover the story. This time, CNN picked up Mary's story, sending a reporter from DC to cover it and bringing national coverage to another cruel attack against a local immigrant. Having the local imprint on a story is essential. When we're lucky enough to get an AP story on a case of immigrant abuse, it spreads like wildfire. But often the AP story is short, the details are unchecked, and it lacks the emotional impact of a local reporter's story. When Timothy Snyder, author of On Tyranny, said, "Support your local news sources, they're the essential independent link in this experiment we call democracy," he was talking about Mary. She's fair, she's invested in the community, and her boots are on the ground. So I just wanted to lift up some of the reflections from some people in this community about you and the way that you have shown up as a journalist.
Thank you.
You're listening to Kica's Corner on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio, broadcast at 103.5 FM and live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So Mary, what's next for you?
You know what? I'm actually just sort of thinking about it. I mean, this came out of nowhere. It just seemed like something I really should do at this point. I really hadn't thought about it before. I hadn't really done a ton of preparation. It's funny being a journalist. You're always on the outside. You're always just watching, and talking to people, and you're not involved. You don't sort of jump into an issue. And there are issues that I think are really important. So I think I'm sort of weighing how much I will, no longer be a journalist and just really get involved, myself in things, or just look for other opportunities to write, just keep writing, which I think I'm more attracted, I think, to do that right now for a little bit, and then, see what I can do. Politics, I'm not sure, if I would just actually, it's funny, you never given a political contribution, so I'm kind of rethinking that some level. So, but that's as far as I've gotten so far.
And what do you wish for New Haven?
I think, well, for people to continue to be involved, you really don't have to tell them that. I think they won't get uninvolved. But how important that is. And, there is somewhat of a division in the city, and, it's good to have critics. It's good to have people out there, on top of things. But maybe a little bit more generous kind of, cooperation. I mean, the city is always under the gun, and now it is again. I mean, with half of its grand list is, it's non-taxable. That never seems to get resolved. It's not gonna. It's really a state issue. I mean, this is states, statutes that created that kind of that focus. So I think, people really making an effort to work together. I think maybe that's the only thing that's I would see. But again, the more people are involved, and the more that they sort of see themselves as all sort of one, unit, can lift up the city. It needs help.
Yeah. We are unfortunately coming to the end of our show, and Mary, as is practice with my guests, it's time to get personal. So here we go. Who is your shiro or hero?
Shiro or hero? My husband, I think. He's a really dedicated guy. Loves teaching, and now that we're in this Zoom environment, he's at one end of the house, I'm at the other. So I can hear him teaching, kids courses back to back, and it's a lot of things about ethics, and what a lot of these kids are going to be future public servants, and the focus is on being honest, being truthful people, and sort of social ethics and social justice. So I hear that at one end of the house. So he's teaching a whole other generation of kids the best way to live out their lives. So that's my hero.
Beautiful. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
To be better technically. God, I mean, that's, I don't want to fall into that category where you get over a certain age and you can't do anything, but that would be it. I think that would be changes.
I hear you. I am very technologically challenged. It's always a heavy lift for me to learn about new technology. If you could have one wish granted, what would it be?
I don't know. I think maybe to continue to have our family closer. That would be one thing. Our daughter and 2 grandkids are in Oregon. My daughter's a great kid. I mean, she's always been this independent person, lives around the country, lived outside the country. So, I totally support all that. But it would be nice to have like a little bit closer distance between us. She was in California for a long time, Australia. She's lived all over. That's one thing I think I'd like to see different.
Finally, and you really are going to have to answer this question. This one you can't duck and weave. Sally's, Pepe's, or Modern Pizza?
Sally's.
Oh my goodness.
No question.
Folks, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you for listening. Mary, thanks so much for being on Kica's Corner. Until the next one, here is wishing you justice and many, many days of sunshine.
Thank you.